Welcome back. The time is 8:36 and you're still tuned in to News and Views with myself, Salalo Makwidire. And in our next segment, we're going to be tackling an issue that's costing South Africa billions in lost tax revenue each year, the illicit cigarette trade. The South African Revenue Services, SARS, has been ramping up efforts to combat this underground economy, but the challenges are immense and the stakes are incredibly high. And to help us understand the complexities of this issue, we are joined by Professor Connor Wahlberg, a leading expert from the School of Economics and the director of the research unit on the economics of accessible products. Good morning, Professor. Thank you so much for joining us and welcome to Salam Media.
Thank you very much. Lovely seeing you.
Awesome. I think first and foremost, I think if you can start by giving us an overview of the illicit cigarette trade in South Africa and the economic impact that it has, just how extensive is this an issue when it comes to, collecting revenue and the impact that it has generally, on South Africa.
Yes, thank you very much. And so if we look at the cigarette market in South Africa, give or take between 9 and 10 million people in South Africa smoke. That's 24% of the adult population. In total, these smokers smoke in the order of about 26 billion cigarettes per year. That's on average per smoker in the order of about 3,000 cigarettes per year, about between 8 and 9 cigarettes per day. And if we then look at the illicit market, unfortunately, the illicit market has grown very substantially since about 2010. It was in the order of about 30% in 2018. It then increased dramatically during 2020 and stayed at the very, very high levels since then. And in the order of about 60% of cigarettes in South Africa consumed every year are in fact illicit. And what we mean by illicit is that the taxes have not been paid. So cigarettes, like alcohol, like sugar-sweetened beverages in South Africa are subject to an excise tax. That's an additional tax over and above the VAT rate. And at the moment, that rate is 21 Rand and 77 cents per pack of cigarettes should go to the government in the form of an excise tax. And for 60% roughly, that tax is not being collected and the government is losing out. So we've done the analysis, and according to our best estimates, give or take 18 billion Rand every year in the last 3 years has been not collected because of the illicit market in cigarettes. It's a very, very large number and it's a very big problem.
I think yesterday, the SARS commissioner, Mr. Kieswetter, he lamented the fact that they're going to be more, aggressive when it comes to tackling the issue of illicit cigarette trading in South Africa. Generally, how has SARS been dealing with this issue? Have they been handling it? Are there signs and shoots, showing that, we might see, a slight decrease in illicit trading in South Africa?
Yeah, so if I can give a bit of a historical background on that one. So from about 2010 onwards, illicit trade in South Africa started becoming a significant problem. And in 2014, the Revenue Services had a number of units that were specifically focused on reducing illicit trade. And those units were starting to do pretty good work. And we saw that there was a bit of a reduction in illicit trade in 2014 and in the beginning of 2015. Then sadly, in 2015, we saw that there was, under the leadership of Mr. Tomoyane at the time, a complete dismantling of these different units that were specifically focused on the illicit trade. And we have heard a lot of stories about the so-called rogue unit and things like that. Eventually, that all turned out to be all hogwash, and those rogue units were dismantled basically on spurious and incorrect arguments. But what effectively happened was that the illicit trade was substantially increasing during that period of Mr. Tomoyane as being the commissioner of SARS. So illicit trade increased from about 20% in 2010 to about 35% in 2018 because of the fact that basically there was no real control by SARS on the illicit market. Things became slightly better after there was a new commissioner appointed after Mr. Moyane was removed from office. And what we then found is that illicit trade became a bit less. In 2020, the government implemented the sales ban. So for 20 weeks, the sale of tobacco products became completely banned as a result of trying to fight the coronavirus. In the beginning, I think there was a good reason for it. There was a lot of uncertainty about what's the relationship between tobacco use and the coronavirus and getting COVID-19 and so on. Subsequently, after the first 5 weeks, I don't think that there was much justification for that ban to remain in place. But what that ban unfortunately did do is to entrench the illicit market. And we saw that people were now buying pretty much any type of cigarette out of desperation. They weren't necessarily buying the preferred brands, and they were buying pretty much anything. And many of those people actually then stayed with these illicit brands even after the ban was lifted in August of 2020. And then we saw that we had this massive spike in illicit trade during this period, and it remained at that very, very high and elevated level over there. I think what's happening is that SARS is aware of the problem. It's not that they are completely unaware of the problem. That's not true. But what's happening is they have been emasculated in 2015 through at the same time, in 2020, there was an issue that was outside of their control that they now need to manage and try to reduce the illicit market. And I think by implementing, for instance, the CCTV cameras in the various pack houses and the various manufacturing plants, that makes a whole lot of sense. Unfortunately, as you well know, probably, the court case has gone against them, and the Revenue Services is currently appealing that court case with the hope that they will be able to implement these cameras in the different manufacturing plants and the warehouses of these producers of cigarettes. And this includes not just the large manufacturers, but also the smaller manufacturers as well.
A bulk of these illicit cigarettes obviously come through our very, very porous borders, particularly with Zimbabwe, which are some of the biggest tobacco producers on the continent. Is there any kind of dual cooperation between South Africa and Zimbabwe to try and counter this? Because I think if the situation at the border still remains the same, surely there's nothing SARS can do, because ultimately the illicit cigarettes will always find themselves in the streets of South Africa.
Yeah, I think there's a misperception, and I suspect that you might have it as well, that all these illicit cigarettes are coming from abroad. We don't have the precise numbers, and I'm not suggesting that I have full insight in this, but what we do know, and what the evidence seems to suggest, that most of the illicit trade in South Africa is not because of smuggling in through porous borders from Zimbabwe and Botswana and so on. Of course, that's part of the problem, but most of the cigarettes that are illicit in South Africa are simply undeclared production. So in other words, producers are producing a number of cigarettes in South Africa, and they simply declare a very small fraction of them, and the other cigarettes are coming into the market. And for that reason, the Revenue Services is wanting to implement these CCTV cameras in the South African producers, such that they are in a position to be able to see what's going on and make sure that the declared values and the actual values roughly coincide. But it is true that there are producers in neighboring countries. We know that Gold Leaf Tobacco Corporation, a company that in August of 2022 was placed under curatorship by the South African Revenue Services, they've got a lot of manufacturing capacity in Zimbabwe, and a substantial amount of their cigarettes are coming in from Zimbabwe. But they also have got manufacturing facilities within South Africa, and those are the ones that I suspect that SARS is targeting specifically.
Is there a way, any kind of way, that consumers can know, that the pack of cigarettes that they're buying and are smoking is illicit? It's illegal. It has not been declared.
Absolutely. So in different countries, there are different ways of seeing whether a pack of cigarettes is illicit. In South Africa, the single most important determinant whether a pack is illicit or not is the price of the product. So the excise tax on cigarettes in South Africa is 21 Rand 77 cents. If you add the VAT on top of that, and you add sort of some production costs, some distribution costs, it is practically impossible for a tobacco company to sell a pack of cigarettes at less than about 32 to 35 Rand. So any price that is less than that, you can be like 99% sure that that is an illicit pack of cigarettes, simply because the excise tax have not been paid. That does not guarantee that a pack of cigarettes that is sold at, say, 40 Rand has got all the excise taxes paid. We can't guarantee that necessarily because we don't have a tax stamp system in South Africa. But the probability that the taxes have been paid if the price is 35 Rand or more is much higher than if you're buying a pack of cigarettes for 15 or 20 Rand or even 25 Rand a pack. You can be pretty sure that that pack of cigarettes is not legally well, it has been legally produced, possibly, but it certainly has not been subject to the excise tax that should be paid on that product.
And just lastly, looking ahead, what additional steps do you think are needed to be taken to effectively reduce and ultimately eliminate the illicit cigarette trade in South Africa?
Yeah, so I think the government can do a number of different things. So we as a country are part of an international treaty called the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. This is a treaty that's been run by the World Health Organization. More than 180 countries around the world are members of that, including South Africa. As part of that treaty, they have then created a new treaty that they call the Protocol to Eliminate Illicit Trade in Tobacco Products. And at this point in time, something between 60 and 70 countries have already ratified that. South Africa has signed that treaty, but we haven't ratified it. So in other words, we haven't made it applicable to South Africa. If we were to ratify the protocol, we commit ourselves as a country to implement different strategies to reduce illicit trade in tobacco products. We are going to be the beneficiaries of that. We're going to get more revenue. We're going to make cigarettes more expensive. Some people are going to subsequently quit smoking, which will be to their benefit and will be to the public health benefit of South Africa. And the things that would be expected of South Africa, of this African government, if we were to ratify the protocol, essentially what we would commit ourselves to is we would say we want to secure the supply chain. At this point in time, the supply chain is not secure. What we find is that tobacco companies produce cigarettes, they sell it, and then they say, I don't care. I don't know who it's going to, and so on. If I've got the time, and if you allow me, up for 10 years, the main export market of South African cigarettes, the single most important export market, was Mali. Why Mali? Mali doesn't have many people, it doesn't have many smokers, but there are distribution channels within Mali that will then take those cigarettes and spread them into other parts of North Africa, into parts of Europe, and so on. So that was absolutely wrong, where we would be exporting to basically smugglers and even terrorists, where these cigarettes would then be out of the hands of South African producers, but would nevertheless cause significant harm and be to the detriment of other countries. So that's one thing. We want to secure the supply chain. You do that by licensing everybody that is involved in the process, the manufacturers, the wholesalers, potentially even the retailers. You also want to implement a system that is known as a track and trace system. A track and trace system means that each and every pack of cigarettes has got a stamp on it, and we can then track how that pack of cigarette has gone through the supply process. In other words, we can see when it was produced, when it went to a particular wholesaler, when it went to a particular retailer, and it also allows us to trace back where that product came from. In other words, if I pick up a pack of cigarettes, I can then say, right, this is the route that particular pack has followed to get to the eventual customer that is me or anybody else. So those are a number of things that we would commit ourselves to. And a large number of countries have already implemented this track and trace system. This is not just a system that applies to high income, highly developed countries. Countries like Kenya, like Brazil, like Turkey, they have been able to implement these track and trace systems to very substantial effect. That does not mean to say that we're going to reduce illicit trade to zero. I think that would be unrealistic, but we have got a lot of space to move in if we are sitting in a situation where we have 60% illicit trade in South Africa as we have at the moment. That is a very, very high percentage. It's one of the highest in the world. It is very, very serious, and I am very grateful and very glad that SARS is taking it seriously as what it is at the moment.
All right. I think we're going to leave it there, Professor Conor van Waalbeek. Thank you so much for giving us your time and enlightening us on this critical issue. I think it needs a lot of attention just because of the tremendous amount that SARS is losing in tax revenue every year. I'm going to leave it here for now. Thank you so much. Well, there you have it. I think it's clear that the fight against the illicit cigarette trade is complex and very multifaceted. But one thing that I want to know, the guys that smoke cigarettes, are you a smoker? Do you check? Do you care if the cigarettes that you're smoking are properly taxed? They come through the right channels, or as long as you can get it for cheap, doesn't really matter. Hey, give us a call. I want to find out from smokers if does it really matter? I think we saw during the coronavirus that the guys were just buying any kind of cigarette that they can lay their hands on. But it's a big problem. It's a problem that SARS has been struggling with for a long time. And you can give us a call 01168000355. Our WhatsApp line is 0617660355, and let us know if you have any way to check. I think Professor Conor van Waalbeek mentioned the pricing of the cigarettes themselves, and if you can tell by just how they're priced, if whether or not there's a tax levy that has been put onto them. But do you care? Do you check? It'll be interesting to find out. We're going to take a quick break. We'll see you after this. You're still tuned into News and Views with myself, Salalo Makwidira, here on Salam Media.